Welcome to Her Life Unscripted podcast, inspiring burnt out, stressed out, and stretched thin women to embrace the unscriptedness of life. Hosted by Anna Osborne.
Hello, ladies, and welcome to Her Life Unscripted, episode 14. I am so jazzed to be here with all of you today. It has been bleeping hot the past week. I mean, we've been like 106, 104. It's been too hot to even just do anything besides eat peanut butter and jelly for dinner. So I am so excited. This week looks like it's going to be significantly cooler, which will be very, very nice. And just getting back to reality a little bit. The kids went back to school today and they are now in 3-day-a-week preschool. So I am ready to get back to the kind of fall routine, even though it's still August, of just being able to kind of create a little bit of normalcy. We did a lot of fun family trips this summer. And we still have one left coming up, going to visit my father-in-law for a week or so. But it's nice just to have the kids back in school and trying to reestablish all that good stuff like bedtimes and normal dinner hours and all that stuff. It should be a challenge, but I'm definitely up for it. And it's been incredible just getting to know all of you the past month and a half as we have been rolling with the podcast. It's been really, really humbling being able to hear your guys' voices and your feedback and people listening and just sharing parts of themselves with me, and really how the podcast has impacted them. It's just been profound. So I'm so excited and just really, really grateful for all of you that have reached out. And please keep sending in the feedback. I'm starting to stockpile some of your guys' messages via the SpeakPipe app. And I'm super excited to be able to have a show coming up probably in September where I'm sharing a lot of those audio feedbacks on the show and being able to kind of answer some questions and really be able to interact with the audience a little bit. So please keep those coming in. I'll always make sure to have that link in our show notes, or you can also pop over to my website, herlifeunscripted.com, to get the link to the SpeakPipe app as well. So like I said, it's a beautiful day here, and I'm actually really excited to be talking with you guys today. I had this super cool opportunity that kind of fell into my lap a couple weeks ago where I was actually able to contribute to an article for the Wall Street Journal, which feels like such big time. It's so amazing, those things that happen in our lives. But what was so cool for me about this article was that, first of all, it was something that brought back so many nostalgic memories for me, because actually the Wall Street Journal was my grandfather's favorite newspaper. And I remember as a kid, coming into the living room in the evening and he'd be stretched out in his big old burgundy easy chair with his long legs stretched out and smelling of aqua velva and just diving into this Wall Street Journal every night. And so being able to be asked to participate in an article that obviously had such a nostalgic memory for me was really, really amazing. But what was also cool was that this article is actually all about storytelling, which is a huge part of what Her Life Unscripted is about, is being able to share our stories in the ways that connect with others and create a bond and a sense of community. And so it was just really cool to be able to have, to obviously contribute something like that. But I think what was so neat about it on the other side of it was that the article that I was asked to contribute on was the reporter had read a bit of research and wanted to have a conversation via the news article about it. And the research was that apparently, and I'll link this article in the show notes, but apparently women are attracted to men that are really good storytellers. And right off the bat, that totally hit me, because to be totally honest, that's one of the things that first attracted me to my husband. We actually met on a blind date and we were both a little bit nervous. We had gone out on a double date with some friends. We were both a little nervous, and instantly he started telling stories and I just felt at ease with him. And he just had this great ability, and he actually still does, that when he tells a story, it's like the whole room kind of quiets down and pays attention to him, because he just has this great way of sharing. And also, funny enough, his mom used to always say, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And so even though after many years of my husband and I being together, I've probably heard most of his stories, I still really do love to hear them again and again. And I actually will ask him to tell some stories sometimes when I'm feeling a little bit down, because it's just this amazing way that he captivates my attention when he tells a story. But kind of getting back to the research, talking about women being attracted to men that are great storytellers, I was thinking about kind of the reason why. And for me, I think the reason why we connect through story is because storytelling is really vulnerable. It it's offering someone else a piece of us. And when we're sharing and being able to connect through our vulnerability, through our pain, through our experience, we have this really unique opportunity to be really present in each other's lives, even if we weren't there for when the story originally occurred. And so it really made me realize that, yeah, storytelling is a very attractive trait, but we also live in a culture that uses storytelling in so many ways. Simply put, storytelling is this way of describing, kind of an event that, that conveys emotion and engages the listener. It's letting them be moved by the sharing of our experience. And so realizing how important storytelling is and really how important it is in our relationships, it made me really start to think about, how do we heal through our stories? How do we create connection? How do we bond? And really wanting to spend some time discussing that with all of you today, because it really is, kind of the whole sentiment behind Her Life Unscripted. It's this great demonstration of why we storytell and how it connects us. And so thinking about why it connects us, for me, storytelling connects me to a very vulnerable part of somebody else. When they share their story with me, not only do I feel like they're trusting me with a piece of themselves, but I also feel like they're letting me into a part of them that was so important in their past, right? We don't usually tell stories that don't have any meaning to us. We typically don't retell stories that have no meaning to us. But being able to realize that when somebody offers a part of themselves to us, we really get drawn into that, right? There's this immediate connection of thinking like, wow, you trusted me enough to share the story and you're allowing me into a window of your world. And I just think that's an incredible thing that we can do. I think it's also something that bonds us. Like I said previously, that when my husband tells a story, there's a way that he captivates kind of the room around him. But there's also a way that when we tell our stories, it really is bonding through that vulnerability of being able to talk about our own journey. And for those of you obviously listening, we all realize that our journeys have wounds along the way. And so when we bond through storytelling, I really feel like it's such a connection of allowing our vulnerability to be seen and also to be able to have it have importance in that moment rather than feeling like it's something that we have to hide away or minimize. But I also think that storytelling is incredibly healing. I remember when I went through like the birth education class for my kids, where they tell you kind of what it's going to be like when you go into labor and all those crazy things. I remember the midwife saying that she found a huge amount of people who had very rigid birth plans that, because childbirth is such a miraculously amazing thing, and it's also something that rarely goes according to how we've planned it, that she's found that people that had more rigid birth plans, that they tended to retell their birth story over and over and over because there was a level of trauma that had occurred between what they had planned to have happen and then what actually happened. And I thought like, gosh, yeah, that really actually makes sense, because we do need to retell our story. And when there has been a significant level of trauma in our story, the retelling of it is something that heals us. But I think what's something that's really powerful too is recognizing that how do we, what is it about those people that have been able to spin their life events to tell their story in a positive way? And I think that's a really unique quality, because we've all met people before who tell us their story, and their story is so intense that there's still a considerable amount of trauma and emotionality in that story, to where it can almost be hard to witness it because the story is so alive still. And it's so raw, right? And although it's so important to have those stories be told and be on the front lines of it, it also can be really, really exhausting being on the front lines of people telling a story over and over when there's been no healing that's occurred. And so I think that's this really amazing quality of being able to figure out, how do certain people spin their life events to tell their story in a positive way? And I think I want to try and tackle it today on the show. So let's dig into it. For many of you know, because I've talked about her quite often in these podcasts, you know that I'm a huge Brené Brown fan. And one of her books, Rising Strong, is, there's so many pieces of just wisdom in it. But she writes this book, and in it is so much about our stories and how storytelling is part of our healing process. At the very beginning, there's a part of her book that says, when we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write the ending. And I really think that that's a huge component of this question of saying, how do we become people who are able to spin our stories in a way that allows us to tell them in a positive way? And it really is by being able to own our stories. So she talks about in the book of being able to, she connected with some of the producers at Pixar and about, storytelling and how it's utilized in the movies and all those sorts of things. But one thing that she talks about, she was emailing one of the producers and they were talking about stories. And the producer, broke down the 3 acts within any movie. And we know obviously movies are all about storytelling. And so I want to describe to you the 3 acts of any good movie and really tie it into this question of storytelling and how can we spin our life events to tell our story, not only in a positive way, but in a healing way. So give me a second here. This is from Brene Brown's book, Rising Strong. So the producer of Pixar says that there are 3 acts to any good movie, any good story. Act 1, the protagonist is called to adventure and accepts the adventure. The rules of the world are established, and the end of Act 1 is the inciting incident. Okay. And so if we think about our own lives, we think about these ways that we have been called to adventure and we accept that adventure, but then something happens to where there's that inciting incident. And the inciting incident is really where the development or the event that begins the problem of the story, right? So basically everything up until that moment is the backstory, and everything after that inciting incident is the story. And so I think that if we think about life, right, that life is going, and then the event or the problem happens, and then our story really begins, right? Because I feel like for me that my true character came out when the story actually started. The backstory is important. It's my roots. It's who I am. But it wasn't until that moment where the problem happened that everything else becomes super relevant. And so that's how really the inciting incident is thought of. And so Act 2, the protagonist looks for every comfortable way to solve the problem. By the climax, she learns what it's really going to take to solve the problem. This act includes the lowest of the low. And I love this description of Act 2. I actually highlighted it in Brene Brown's book when I was reading it, because it really is the middle part of our story when we're in it trying to solve a problem in every way possible, especially those comfortable ways. We realize that the comfortable ways won't be the way towards healing, right? That by the climax of our story, we have to learn what it's really going to take to solve the problem. And we really do feel the lowest of the low, because then we are called upon to act in these ways of bravery and courage and ways that we never even knew possible or didn't even know existed within us. And then the third act, the protagonist needs to prove she's learned the lesson, usually showing a willingness to prove this at all costs. This is all about redemption, an enlightened character knowing what to do to resolve a conflict. And I feel like that's so true, right? Like we get to the part where we are really proving to everyone, especially ourselves, at all costs, that there is a redemption story within all of us, that we are this really kind of enlightened character and we know what to do in terms of resolving a conflict. And so kind of bringing this back full circle of storytelling and why it is so important to us individually and collectively in terms of connecting and bonding and how it radiates vulnerability, but also how it heals us. These 3 acts break down how we're able to spin our life events to be able to tell our stories in a healing way, with being able to kind of figure out what this adventure is that we're on. And it may not look like an adventure. It may look like the world's worst nightmare, but being able to identify what it is. And then in the middle, realizing that we're not going to be able to heal from this journey without feeling uncomfortable, right? That change and healing doesn't happen by taking the comfortable path. but it comes by digging in and discovering qualities about ourselves that we never knew to be true. And then the final act, which is the healing part of our story, where we overcome that journey or overcome that nightmare, if you will, and see ourselves on the other side and learning things about ourselves that we never knew were within us. And I think that really is the key to it, is that when we move through that story and notice the things about ourselves that stood out and the things about ourselves that we learned and also learned in the people around us, we get these really, really amazing healing moments that come from it. And I just think that it's a profound thing that we can do when we can utilize our story for healing. So my challenge to really you is, how have you used your own story for healing? Have you used it to connect with others and create a bond through shared experiences? Or have you been able to share that story through the written word or through poetry or through music? Like, how have you shared your story to give it power and to give it importance, but also to be able to use it as a way to heal and really define kind of who you are as a person and what that means for you in your relationship? So I think it's just this really profound question. And I know too that through storytelling, at least in my experience, that when we move through sharing about ourselves through storytelling, we're also able to move out of the story to a point that we're able to see it from kind of a bird's eye view, if you will. And that in of itself is healing. I think that oftentimes, in the work that I do with clients, is that our stories are always going to have a level of trauma in them, right? Because what happened was traumatizing when we've gone through these different events in our lives. But the true power of healing is no longer being traumatized by your story. So again, that's not that your story loses the trauma. It's that we're no longer traumatized by it. And I think that's really where we start seeing people being able to spin their life events into positive ways, because it comes full circle to a learning about ourselves and being able to see our injuries, our wounds, our trauma, whatever you want to call it, from enough of a distance through our own storytelling that we're no longer triggered or traumatized by the telling of the story. And that is when truly healing happens. So I'm just so excited to hear what you guys have to say about storytelling, how you've woven into your life, and also culturally. I think that storytelling is an amazing thing when we talk about history being passed from generation to generation. And I just really want to hear your guys' own experience with storytelling. Who was the person in your family that told the best stories? Who was the family member that told the worst stories? And what did you learn from the stories about your family? And what have you done with those stories to carry them on within your own generations and things like that? So lots of questions for today, and I will be sure and include in the show notes all of the different articles and things that I talked about today. But I'm just really excited to be really highlighting storytelling in our conversation today. Like I said, it's such a sentiment behind Her Life Unscripted, because as many of you know, Her Life Unscripted isn't necessarily about the nitty-gritty of our story as much as it is about how our story changed us. What did we do when life went off script? How did it change the way that we viewed the world, the way that we loved, the way that we trusted, the way that we risked? Those are all the things that I think are so fascinating about our stories, is how it changed us, and really knowing that we can create that connection with others by being able to share how our story made us who we are. Because all of you listening today are just uniquely amazing. And I'm so excited for those of you that I've been able to meet who have reached out and shared yourself with me. But it really is this really amazing thing of being able to connect in a way that I don't really know any other ways that we connect that have the same level of depth and vulnerability as storytelling does. So thank you so much for allowing me into your worlds and into your hearts and being able to have this time with you guys today. And thanks for letting me share parts of my story with you. And I cannot wait to hear your stories too. So please feel free to share them. And I look forward to hearing from you offline at Anna@herlifeunscripted.com or via the SpeakPipe app. Can't wait to talk to all of you lovely ladies soon. Take care.
Want to learn about the latest retreats, workshops, and speaking events hosted by Anna? Head over to herlifeunscripted.com to get in on all the juicy details. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast so we can continue to grow our amazing audience. Lastly, be sure and send in your voice feedback via the SpeakPipe app or to Anna@herlifeunscripted.com. We can't wait to hear from you.